A millionaire CEO, master of a clockwork empire, steps into a hospital for a deal that could redefine his legacy. But when three little girls, sobbing outside an ICU room, look up at him with eyes that echo his own, his world of precision shatters, and a forgotten past demands to be reclaimed. Grace Thompson, 38, was a man who owned time. His life was a meticulously orchestrated machine. Board meetings at dawn, private jets by noon, and decisions that moved millions by dusk. As CEO of Nextech Solutions, he'd built an empire on artificial intelligence, his algorithms powering everything from medical diagnostics to global logistics. His penthouse office overlooked Manhattan's skyline, a glittering testament to his success. But Grace's true currency was control over his schedule, his emotions, his legacy. Today, November 12, 2024, he strode through the glass doors of St. Michael's Hospital in New York, his navy Brioni suit sharp as a blade. His mission was clear: finalize a $50 million funding proposal for a state-of-the-art pediatric wing, a project that would cement Nextech's name in healthcare innovation. His assistant, Lauren, had prepped the boardroom pitch to the second: charts, projections, a 12-minute speech designed to leave no room for doubt. Grace's polished loafers clicked against the marble lobby, his briefcase a steady weight in his hand, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The elevator to the 4th floor was silent save for the hum of its ascent. Grace checked his watch, 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the board meeting. He adjusted his cufflinks, mentally rehearsing his opening line, when the doors slid open. The ICU hallway stretched before him, sterile and stark, its fluorescent lights casting a cold glow. Nurses moved like ghosts, their footsteps muffled, their voices low. The faint beep of monitors pulsed in the air, a rhythm Grace barely noticed, until he saw them. Outside room 402, 3 little girls stood huddled together, their tiny hands clasped as if anchoring each other against a storm. They couldn't have been older than 5, their blonde curls tangled, their faces streaked with tears. They wore matching pink dresses, slightly frayed at the hems, the kind of hand-me-downs that spoke of love but not means. One girl clutched a stuffed rabbit, its left ear nearly severed, her knuckles white from the grip. Another wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her sniffles barely audible. The third stared at the floor, her lips trembling, her small body rigid with the effort to hold herself together. Grace slowed, his stride faltering. The sight was incongruous, a raw wound in the clinical order of the hospital. His first instinct was to keep moving. His meeting was in 10 minutes, and Grace Thompson didn't pause for anything. But something about the girls pinned him in place. The one with the rabbit looked up, her wide brown eyes locking onto his. They were startlingly familiar, like a reflection from a life he'd buried. The curve of her cheek, the slight arch of her brow. It was as if someone had etched pieces of his own face into hers. He stopped entirely, his phone buzzing ignored in his pocket. The hallway seemed to narrow, the beeping monitors fading to a distant hum. Grace wasn't a man who lingered on sentiment. He'd long ago traded demotion for efficiency. His childhood in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts, had taught him that feelings were luxury, success required focus, and he'd honed it like a weapon. Yet here he was staring at 3 children who felt like a question he hadn't prepared to answer. No nurses were nearby, no adults in sight. The girls were alone, and the realization stirred something unfamiliar in his chest. A twist of anger, protectiveness, something he couldn't name. He crouched to their level, his briefcase resting on the floor, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "Hey," he said, "are you girls okay? Did you lose someone?" The tallest girl, her blonde ponytail slightly askew, shook her head. "Our mommy's in there," she said, pointing to the ICU door. Her voice was small but steady, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. "They won't let us see her." Grace glanced at the door, its small window revealing nothing but shadows. "Is someone coming for you?" he asked, his tone careful. All 3 shook their heads in unison. "Just Mommy," the one with Therabit whispered. "There's no one else." Grace's breath caught. The weight of those words, no one else, landed like a stone. He glanced around again, hoping for a nurse, a social worker, anyone to take over. But the hallway remained empty, and the girl's eyes stayed on him, wide and expectant. "What's your mommy's name?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. The smallest girl, her voice barely a breath, said, "Emma. Emma Rivers." The name hit him like a freight train. Emma. He hadn't spoken it in 5 years, hadn't let himself think of her in nearly as long. Emma Rivers, with her warm laugh that could light up a room, her quiet strength that grounded him in ways he hadn't understood at 33. They'd met at a tech conference in Boston, her working as a freelance graphic designer, him a rising star at Nextech. Their romance was brief but intense, a rare crack in Grace's armor. She'd seen through his ambition to the man beneath, the one who still carried the weight of his mother's sacrifices, but it ended abruptly, her leaving a handwritten note. "I need something steady, Grace. I hope you find it too." He'd searched for her once, half-heartedly, before his career swallowed him whole. Now here were 3 girls who might carry pieces of her, and him in their tear-streaked faces. He stood, his mind racing. Still no staff. Frustration flared, sharp and unfamiliar. How could no one be helping them? He marched to the nurse's station, his voice low but edged with steel. "There are 3 children alone outside room 402. They've been there for hours. Someone needs to check on them." The nurse, frazzled, her scrubs wrinkled, blinked up at him. "That's Emma Rivers. We're short-staffed and the girls aren't patients, so—" "They're 5. Grace cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "They're terrified. Do something." The nurse nodded, promising to call a social worker, but Grace was already turning back. He didn't need someone else to step in, not yet. Something primal was waking inside him, a pull he couldn't ignore. Back with the girls, he sat on the cold floor, his $3,000 suit creasing without a second thought. He asked their names and they answered in soft, trembling voices. Maddie, Chloe, and Jane. Maddie was the tallest, her eyes fierce despite her tears, like she'd appointed herself, the protector. Chloe clutched the rabbit, her voice curious despite her fear. Jane, the smallest, barely spoke, her gaze darting between her sisters, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. They told him their mom had been sick, that she'd collapsed the night before. No other family, no one to call. Grace listened, his meeting forgotten, his world shrinking to the space between them. Chloe tilted her head, studying him. "You look like someone Mommy talked about," she said, her words slicing through him. Grace's throat tightened. He didn't know why he stayed, why he couldn't walk away. But those eyes, the ones that felt like his, kept him there, kneeling in a hospital hallway, his carefully ordered life unraveling. He didn't make it to the boardroom. Instead, Hess stayed until a social worker arrived, a tired woman named Marissa with kind eyes and a clipboard. She promised to look after the girls, and Grace gave her his number, asking for updates. As he left the hospital, the city's noise, honking, taxis, chattering pedestrians, felt distant like a radio tuned to the wrong station. He slid into his town car, but instead of heading to the office, he told the driver to take him home. He needed to think, to process the collision of past and present that had just upended his world. Grace's condo was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the 52nd floor of a Tribeca high-rise. The space was a study in minimalism. Polished, hard wood, white walls, a single abstract painting worth more than most people's homes. It was a place for thinking, not feeling, designed for a man who lived alone and preferred it that way. Tonight it felt cavernous, the silence oppressive. He poured a glass of bourbon and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights sprawling below like a digital constellation. But his mind wasn't on Nextech's stock price or the missed board meeting. It was on Emma, her laugh bright and unforced like sunlight breaking through clouds, her handwritten note tucked in a box he hadn't opened in years. The way she'd vanished, leaving him with questions he'd been too busy to answer. He'd assumed she'd moved on, built a life without him. Now he wondered if she'd been protecting something or someone. He retrieved the box from his closet, a relic from a time when he still allowed himself attachments. Inside was her note, think faded but legible. Grace, you're chasing something I can't follow. You need something steady, something real. I hope you find it too. Emma. He'd read it once, then buried it, along with the ache of her absence. Now he saw the note differently, not as a goodbye, but as a plea he'd failed to understand. Sleep eluded him. By 5 a.m., he was back at the hospital, the hallways dim and quiet. The girls were in the family waiting room, curled under a thin hospital blanket, their small bodies tangled together like a single organism. Maddie's arm draped over Chloe, Jane's hand clutching her sister's sleeve. Grace stood in the doorway, a protective ache blooming in his chest. He'd spent his life building systems to predict outcomes, but nothing had prepared him for this. He left a note with a nurse and went to Emma's room. She lay pale and still, tubes snaking from her arms, the monitors beeping steadily. Her blonde hair was damp against her forehead, her skin almost translucent. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile in a way that clawed at him. He sat beside her, unsure if she could hear. I don't know what happened to you, he whispered. But I met Maddie, Chloe, and Jane. They're incredible, Emma, brave and scared and so much like you. His voice cracked, and maybe like me. Her fingers twitched, a reflex or something more, and he stayed an hour talking about the girls, the hallway, the way Jane clung to her rabbit like it was her only anchor. He spoke of his regret, the years he'd let slip away, the life he'd built that now felt hollow. When Hel left, the weight of her silence followed him. The girls were awake when he returned, their eyes lighting up at his presence. He brought bagels and juice, sitting on the floor as they chattered about their favorite cartoons, something about a talking dog and a mystery van. Maddie described their mom's bedtime stories, how she'd make up voices for each character. Chloe asked if he'd ever had a pet. Jane just listened, her gaze steady but silent. When Jane leaned against him, resting her head on his arm, Grace froze, afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile trust she'd offered. Marissa, the social worker, met him that afternoon. She explained Emma's condition, a sudden cardiac event, triggered by an undiagnosed condition, critical but stable. No relatives, no emergency contacts, just the girls. Grace asked about guardianship, his voice steady, despite the chaos in his mind. Marissa cautioned that it was a long process. Evaluations, court hearings, DNA tests. We can start with the test, she said, studying him. Grace nodded, already certain of the truth. That evening, he took the girls to his condo. The space transformed with their presence. Their giggles echoed off the walls. Their tiny socks skidded across the hardwood as they chased each other. Ordered pizza, let them eat on the couch, ignoring the grease stains on the leather. They insisted on bedtime stories, and Grace, who hadn't read aloud since grade school, fumbled through a book about a lost penguin, making voices that sent them into fits of laughter. When they refused to sleep in separate beds, piling into the guest room together, he stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by how right it felt. He called Lauren, his assistant, canceling his schedule for 2 weeks. Sir, you have the Singapore deal. The shareholder. I know, he interrupted. Cancel it. He looked at the girls, asleep in a tangle of limbs, and knew he'd made the right choice. His old life, boardrooms, deals, solitude, felt like a distant dream. This was real, and it demanded everything he had. Grace's life became a whirlwind of small, meaningful chaos. Mornings meant cereal spills and mismatched socks, Chloe insisting on pink bows, Maddie arguing over who got the blue cup. He learned to braid hair, his large hands clumsy but determined, earning giggles from Jane, who rarely spoke but always watched. He packed lunches, uneven sandwiches and apple slices cut too thick, navigating tantrums with a patience he didn't know he possessed. His condo, once a sterile shrine to success, brimmed with life. Crayon drawings covered the fridge, toy cars littered the floor, and laughter echoed through rooms that had known only silence. Grace drove the girls to their preschool in Brooklyn, his sleek Mercedes now a chaos of booster seats and stray Cheerios. Their chatter filled the car. Maddie debating cartoon villains, Chloe singing off-key, Jane humming softly. He'd once measured his days in stock prices. Now they were marked by the girls' mall victories, Chloe tying her shoes, Maddie reading. A full page, Jane whispering her first full sentence to him. I like your stories. Each morning he visited Emma. Her condition was unchanged, but he spoke to her daily, sharing the girls' antics. Chloe says I fold clothes wrong, yo, said one day smiling. But she says it's okay because I'm trying. He confessed his fears. Raising children he hadn't known existed, stepping into a role he wasn't prepared for. He admitted his love, not just for the girls, but for the man he was becoming because of them. Her hand never moved, but he stayed. The act of speaking grounding him in a way his old life never had. He met with Marissa regularly, navigating the guardianship process. There were forms, background checks, home visits. Here searched preschools closer to his condo, wanting the girls in a place with music programs and open spaces, not just desks and rules. He asked their opinions, making them feel heard. They picked sparkly dresses and light-up shoes at a department store, insisting he buy a red tie to match. He wore it without hesitation, their laughter worth more than any boardroom win. One evening, as they cooked pasta, flour dusting the counter, Chloe directing him like a tiny chef, Grace realized his condo no longer felt empty. It was home, not because of its walls, but because of the girls. His phone buzzed with work emails, urgent memos about the Singapore deal, shareholder concerns. But he ignored them. Not yet, he texted Lauren, and went back to the girls' bedtime stories where he now played a pirate, a dragon, and a lost prince, all in one chapter. On day 12, everything changed. Grace was at Emma's bedside, a coffee for the nurse in his hand, when her fingers twitched, then her eyelids fluttered. The monitors shifted, a subtle change in their rhythm. The nurse rushed in, checking the screens. It's a sign, she said, her voice cautious but hopeful. Grace leaned forward, whispering Emma's name. Harry's opened, dazed but alive, her gaze unfocused under the harsh lights. Grace? She croaked, her voice barely audible. He nodded, tears burning his eyes. I'm here. The girls are safe. They've been brave, Emma. She cried, weak but real, her tears soaking the pillow. He held her hand, telling her about the girls, the hallway, the life they'd begun to build. When the nurse left them alone, Emma whispered, I didn't know how to tell you. You were so far away, living a different life. Grace shook his head, his voice thick. I would have come. I'm here now. He told her about Maddie's fierce protectiveness, Chloe's endless questions, Jane's quiet courage. He described the burned pancakes, the car sing-alongs, the way the girls slept tangled together like they couldn't rest without touching. Emma's lips curved, a tired but real smile, and for a moment, the world felt whole. That night, he brought the girls to see her from outside the glass. They waved furiously, pressed their hands to the window, and Emma mouthed, I love you. Maddie held up a drawing, 4 stick figures under a house with a sun in the corner labeled home in shaky letters. Emma cried, and so did Grace. In the car, Chloe asked, And us? Grace smiled, his voice steady. You're going to be better than okay. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were beginning. Emma's recovery was a slow, deliberate march. She began speaking clearly, her voice gaining strength each day. She sat up for short stretches, reading the girls' notes, scribbled hearts and misspelled words that made her laugh and cry. Grace brought them for short visits, and their gentle affection, Maddie's questions about the machines, Chloe's retold stories, Jane's quiet hand-holding, seemed to pull Emma back to life. The girls were instinctively careful, their love a balm for her fragile body. Grace balanced hospital visits with school runs, bedtime stories, and learning to make star-shaped pancakes after Chloe's tearful insistence that circles were boring. He'd always thought multitasking meant juggling high-stakes deals and corporate crises. Now, it was holding Jane through a nightmare while stirring oatmeal for Maddie, who refused to eat unless it had raisins. His old life, early calls, boardroom battles, flights scheduled to the minute, dissolved into crayon-streaked counters and a laptop gathering dust. One afternoon, Marissa handed him custody papers. "Should Emma agree?" she said, her eyes kind but assessing. Grace took them. The weight not a burden but a choice. He wasn't just signing forms, he was claiming a life. That evening he sat with Emma, her face brighter despite the fatigue. Her hair was pulled back, her cheeks holding a hint of color. "They love you," she said softly. "I love them," he replied, his voice just as quiet. "And you?" She smiled, her gaze steady. "You're softer now. Stronger too." They talked about the future, not the past. Grace shared the girls' quirks, Jane's new habit of whispering stories to her rabbit, Chloe's insistence that families eat the same cereal, Maddie's fierce defense of her sisters at school. When Emma asked about custody, he didn't push. "We'll decide together," he said. She took his hand, her grip weak but sure. "We're already a family, we just have to learn how." Emma was discharged a month later, on December 10, 2024, walking out with slow but steady steps, the girls clinging to her arms like the strongest support she could need. They moved into Grace's condo, which had transformed from a sterile showcase to a home. Toy baskets lined the hallway, mismatched socks hid in the couch cushions, and drawings covered the kitchen cabinets. The first night, they ate pink spaghetti, Chloe's idea, executed with food coloring and giggles. The girls talked over each other, updating Emma on school, friends, and Grace's terrible pancake shapes. Emma listened, teary-eyed at first, then laughing, her voice quiet but real. Grace watched her from across the table, not with pity but with awe. She'd survived a crisis that would have broken most, yet here she was, passing the salt, wiping sauce off Maddie's cheek, reminding Jane not to eat with her fingers. It was a strength that redefined everything he thought he knew about resilience. He'd stepped down as CEO, keeping only the chairman's role to prioritize family. The business world called it a scandal, headlines screaming about his fall from grace. He didn't care, he hadn't fallen. He'd walked towards something real. Mornings were chaotic breakfasts, spilled milk, and mismatched shoes. Evenings ended with the girls in pajamas, listening to Emma's stories or Grace's improvised space adventures featuring Arabit named Floppy, inspired by Jane's toy. On March 15, 2025, they threw a backyard party for the girls' 6th birthday. Friends from school ran through the grass, neighbors brought cupcakes, and a magician made coins disappear. But the moment that defined the day came when Emma stood, microphone in hand, her voice trembling but clear. "This is the most unexpected, most beautiful second chance life could offer," she said, thanking everyone. Then she looked at Grace. "Here he's soft and steady. And thank you for finding us when we didn't know we were looking to be found." That night, after the girls fell asleep amid wrapping paper and glittery crowns, Emma and Grace sat on the porch under a string of lights. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. They didn't speak for a while, just listened to the crickets and the wind rustling the trees. Finally, Emma turned to him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd told you back then?" He shook his head, not with regret but with clarity. "We might have had a version of this sooner, but it wouldn't be this version. And I love this one. Messy, hard, completely out of my control." She nodded, leaning, her head on his shoulder. "You're not the man I left," Hesmield, taking her hand, "and you're not the woman who walked away." Inside, taped to the fridge among the drawings, was a piece of paper and colored marker, written by the girls. "Home is everyone being together always." Grace knew they weren't just a family. They were a miracle, rebuilt from pieces he hadn't known he'd lost. He'd spent his life ensuring it never fell apart again. If this story of redemption and love touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support brings more stories like this to life, reminding All of the miracles found in second chances. Join our community and be part of the journey.